David Chen had been driving for Uber in Miami for 3 years. It wasn't his dream job. He'd been an accountant before the pandemic cost him his position. But it paid the bills and gave him flexibility while he looked for something better. The late shift was usually quiet. Airport runs, drunk partiers heading home, the occasional business traveler. David had learned to read people quickly, who wanted to chat, who wanted silence, who might be trouble. When the ping came at 11:47 p.m. for a pickup at a budget motel near the airport, David hesitated. That area was sketchy, known for drugs, prostitution, and other activities law-abiding people avoided. But the fare was going to Miami International Airport, which meant decent money, and David needed to make his weekly quota. He accepted the ride and pulled into the motel parking lot 10 minutes later. 3 passengers were waiting, 2 men and a young woman. The men were in their 40s, dressed in dark clothes, speaking what sounded like Russian or another Eastern European language. The woman was maybe 19 or 20, thin, with blonde hair and eyes that looked hollow even in the dim parking lot light. Something immediately felt off. The woman wasn't carrying any luggage, unusual for an airport trip. She was wearing a light jacket despite the warm Miami night, and she kept her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold or scared. The 2 men flanked her, one on each side, not quite touching her but clearly controlling her movements. David's instincts screamed at him to cancel the ride and drive away. But the woman's eyes met his for just a second, and he saw something in them. Desperation, fear, a silent plea. He made a decision. Airport, he confirmed, keeping his voice casual. Yes, one of the men said, his English heavily accented. International terminal. We have flight. The 3 passengers got in the back seat, the woman in the middle, sandwiched between the 2 men. David adjusted his rearview mirror so he could watch them without being obvious about it. As he pulled onto the highway, the men resumed their conversation in their native language. The woman stared straight ahead, silent, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. David couldn't understand what the men were saying, but their body language told him plenty. They were relaxed, confident, discussing something that made them laugh occasionally. The woman remained rigid, unmoving except for the slight tremor in her shoulders. Then one of the men switched to English, probably thinking the driver wasn't paying attention or wouldn't care. Once we get through security, it will be easy, the man said. The passport looks good. She won't cause problems. And if she does? The other man asked. Then we remind her what happens to her sister if she doesn't cooperate. That usually works. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face neutral, his eyes on the road. This wasn't a normal airport trip. This was human trafficking. David's mind raced as he drove. He had maybe 20 minutes before they reached the airport. 20 minutes to decide what to do. Option 1, do nothing. Drop them off. Collect his fare. Pretend he hadn't heard or noticed anything. It was safe. It was easy. It wasn't his problem. Option 2, call the police. But what would he say? He'd overheard a vague conversation in a language he didn't understand, with one sentence in English that might mean something, or might not. Would the police even take him seriously? Would they get there in time? And if the men realized he'd called the cops, would they hurt the woman, hurt him? Option 3, try to help directly. But how? He was one middle-aged driver against 2 men who were clearly part of something organized and dangerous. David glanced in the rearview mirror again. The woman was staring at her hands, tears silently running down her face. One of the men noticed and said something sharp in their language. She quickly wiped her eyes, nodding submissively. That decided it for David. He couldn't do nothing. He couldn't let this woman be trafficked to wherever these men were taking her, knowing he'd had a chance to stop it. But he had to be smart. He needed help, and he needed to not alert the men that anything was wrong. David had a Samsung phone mounted on his dashboard for navigation. He activated the voice assistant without touching the phone, making it look like he was just adjusting something. Hey Google, he said casually. Call FBI Miami. One of the men leaned forward. What are you doing? Just checking the route, David said, keeping his voice steady. Traffic near the airport is always bad this time of night, making sure we don't hit delays. The man seemed satisfied and sat back, but David's phone was already dialing. FBI Miami field office, a voice answered. This is a recorded line. How can I help you? David had to be careful. The men in the back could hear everything he said. He needed to communicate his emergency without being obvious about it. Yeah, hi, David said, making his voice casual like he was talking to a friend. I'm heading to the airport, Terminal J, probably arriving in about 15 minutes. Just wanted to confirm the pickup location for the airport run. There was a pause. The FBI operator was trained. She recognized something was wrong. Sir, did you say FBI Miami? This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's right, David said, still casual. Terminal J, international departures. 3 passengers. Should be there in 15 minutes. Maybe less with traffic. Sir, are you unable to speak freely? Exactly. Yeah. You know how these airport runs are. Are you in immediate danger? Not at the moment, but the traffic can get pretty unpredictable. Do you have passengers who are in danger? Yes, that's right. 3 total. Can you give me your vehicle information and current location? David rattled off his license plate number and their current position on I-95, framing it as if he was confirming details for a pickup. The operator, brilliant and professional, kept her responses brief and natural sounding. Officers are being dispatched now, she said. Can you delay arriving at the airport? I can try, but you know how tight flight schedules are. Stay on the line. Do not hang up. Keep this connection open. Will do. See you soon. David left the line open, the phone still mounted on the dashboard. In the mirror, he saw the woman's eyes flick to him for just a second. Had she understood what he'd just done? Did she dare to hope? David needed to buy time for the FBI to get into position. The airport was still 12 minutes away at normal speed. He could stretch that to 15, maybe 17 minutes if he was creative. Excuse me, he said, glancing in the rearview mirror. I'm getting a low fuel warning. I need to stop for gas real quick. There's a station coming up. Won't take more than 5 minutes. One of the men immediately protested. No stops. We need to make our flight. I understand, David said apologetically, but if I run out of gas on the highway, you'll definitely miss your flight. This will be quick, I promise. The men conferred briefly in their language. Finally, one of them said fine, but fast. Very fast. David pulled into a gas station, his heart hammering. This was dangerous. Getting out of the car meant he'd be vulnerable, but it bought time. As he pumped gas, he kept his eyes on the back seat. The men were watching him carefully. The woman was staring straight ahead, motionless. David's phone was still in the car, still connected to the FBI operator. He hoped she could hear everything, hoped she was coordinating with officers who were hopefully getting closer. He deliberately fumbled with the gas pump, taking longer than necessary. One of the men got out of the car. Hurry, he said, his voice hard and threatening. We need to go, now. Almost done, David said, forcing his hands to stay steady as he replaced the gas cap. Just need to run in and grab a receipt for my records. No, the man said flatly. Get in car. Drive now. There was no room for argument. David got back in the driver's seat, his mind still racing. He'd bought maybe 7 extra minutes. It would have to be enough. As he pulled back onto the highway, David deliberately took a wrong turn, heading toward the airport on a longer route that would add a few more minutes. This is not right way, one of the men said immediately. Sorry, David said. Detour ahead on the main route. My GPS is rerouting us. We'll still get there on time, don't worry. The lie was thin, but the men seemed to accept it, or at least they didn't have a choice. They didn't know Miami's roads well enough to argue effectively. David drove carefully, not too slow to be suspicious, but not hurrying either. Every minute mattered. Every second bought the FBI more time to set up whatever they were planning. In the mirror, he saw the woman's lips moving slightly. She was either praying or counting or trying to keep herself together. Her fingers were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Hold on, David thought. Just hold on a little longer. As David approached the airport, his phone, still connected to the FBI, vibrated with a text message that appeared on his dashboard display. Do not proceed to terminal. Exit at Airport Service Road. Officers in position. David's mouth went dry. The service road was coming up in half a mile. This was it. Actually, David said, keeping his voice casual, there's major construction at the international terminal. All rideshare pickups and drop-offs have been moved to the service area. New policy as of this week. I need to drop you there, and you'll take a shuttle to your terminal. It was a reasonable-sounding lie. The men clearly didn't know Miami's airport well enough to dispute it. David took the exit for the Airport Service Road, a less-traveled access road that airport employees and service vehicles used. It was dimly lit, away from the main terminals. As soon as David turned onto the service road, he saw them. Police cars, FBI vehicles, agents in tactical gear. They'd blocked the road completely, creating a perimeter that David's car was driving straight into. What is this? One of the men shouted, finally realizing something was wrong. David stopped the car. Everyone stay calm, he said. Just do what they say, and no one gets hurt. The men started yelling in their language. One reached for the door handle, but FBI agents were already surrounding the vehicle, weapons drawn. FBI, show me your hands. Do not move. What happened next was chaos. The agents yanked open the doors. The 2 men were pulled from the car, thrown to the ground, handcuffed. They were screaming, threatening, demanding lawyers. The woman was helped out gently by a female agent who spoke to her in what sounded like Russian, asking if she was hurt, telling her she was safe now. David sat in the driver's seat, shaking, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. An FBI agent knocked on his window. Mr. Chen, I'm Special Agent Maria Santos. You can step out of the vehicle now. You're safe. David's legs felt like rubber as he got out. Is she okay? He asked immediately. The woman, is she okay? Agent Santos looked at him with an expression David couldn't quite read. Thanks to you. Yes, she's okay. Can you come with me? We need to get your statement. David was taken to a makeshift command center the FBI had set up in an airport maintenance building. He sat in a small room, drinking terrible coffee, while agents came and went. Agent Santos sat across from him with a recorder and notepad. Mr. Chen, I need you to tell me everything that happened from the moment you picked up those passengers. Every detail you can remember. David recounted the entire ride, the motel pickup, the woman's fearful eyes, the men's conversation in their language, the snippet he'd overheard in English about passports and sisters, his decision to call the FBI, his attempts to delay reaching the airport. You took a significant risk, Santos said when he finished. Those men are dangerous. They're part of an Eastern European trafficking network we've been tracking for months. If they'd realized what you were doing. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I couldn't not do something, David said quietly. I saw her face. I knew she needed help. I've heard about trafficking, read articles, seen the news stories, but you always think it's something that happens to other people in other places. You never think you'll actually encounter it. Santos nodded. Most people wouldn't have noticed, or if they noticed, they wouldn't have acted. They'd tell themselves it wasn't their business. You did both. You noticed, and you acted. That woman is alive and free because of you. What happens to her now? David asked. She'll be taken to a facility for trafficking victims. She'll get medical care, counseling, legal assistance. We'll need her testimony against the men who trafficked her, but we'll protect her throughout the process. Santos paused. Her name is Elena Popov. She's 19 years old, from Moldova. She was promised a job as a nanny in the United States. When she arrived in Miami 3 months ago, her passport was taken, and she was forced into prostitution. Those men were taking her to New York, where she'd been sold to another trafficking ring. David felt sick. 3 months. She's been here 3 months, and no one helped her until tonight? Trafficking victims often don't reach out for help, Santos explained. They're threatened, isolated. Their families back home are threatened. They don't trust authority. Sometimes because authority in their home countries is corrupt. Sometimes because they've been told they'll be arrested and deported if they talk to police. She leaned forward. Elena didn't ask for help tonight. She couldn't. Those men were with her constantly. She had no opportunity, no phone, no freedom. If you hadn't called us, she'd be in New York right now, disappearing into a system that might have killed her within a year. The weight of that settled over David. He'd saved a life tonight. Actually, literally saved a life. Over the next several hours, as FBI agents interrogated the two traffickers, the scope of the operation became clear. The men were Viktor Kozlov and Dmitry Sokolov, both with extensive criminal records in Eastern Europe. They were part of a trafficking network that brought women from Moldova, Ukraine, and Romania to the United States under false pretenses, then forced them into prostitution. Elena was one of at least 12 women the network had trafficked into Miami in the past year. The FBI had been tracking them but hadn't had enough evidence for arrests until tonight. Your phone call gave us probable cause, Agent Santos explained to David. We'd been watching these guys, but we needed concrete evidence of a crime in progress. Your 911 call, well, technically your FBI call provided that. We were able to mobilize quickly because we'd already been building a case. She showed David a photo array. Do you recognize any of these women? David looked at the photos. Young women, all Eastern European looking, all with the same hollow, frightened eyes he'd seen in Elena. No, he said. Should I? These are other women we believe this network has trafficked. Now that we have Kozlov and Sokolov in custody, we're hoping they'll give up information about where these women are. But trafficking networks are sophisticated. The guys at the bottom often don't know the full structure. Santos fixed David with an intent look. Would you be willing to testify at trial if needed? David didn't hesitate. Yes, whatever you need. It could be dangerous, Santos warned. These are organized criminals with international connections. They have resources to intimidate or harm witnesses. I don't care, David said. If my testimony helps put them away and rescue other women, I'll do it. Santos smiled slightly. We'll provide protection if necessary. But Mr. Chen, David, I want you to understand something. What you did tonight wasn't just heroic. It was smart. You didn't try to be a vigilante. You didn't confront dangerous criminals directly. You used the tools available to you. Your phone, your wits, your ability to stay calm under pressure. You involved professionals and let us do our job. She stood up. That's the kind of intervention that actually saves lives. You're a hero, but you're a smart hero. That's the best kind. David thought he'd just give his statement and go back to his normal life. He was wrong. Within 24 hours, the story broke. Uber driver's quick thinking saves trafficking victim. Local news picked it up. Then national news. Then international. David's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. News networks wanted him on their shows. Social media was calling him a hero, though some trolls were criticizing him for not doing more or risking the victim's life by getting involved. Uber corporate called to praise his actions and offered him a position in their safety division. Better pay, actual benefits, using his experience to train other drivers on recognizing and responding to potential trafficking situations. I'm an accountant, David told the Uber recruiter. Or I was. I don't know anything about corporate safety. You know more than you think, the recruiter said. You recognized a dangerous situation. You found a way to communicate with authorities without alerting the criminals. You bought time for law enforcement to respond. Those are exactly the skills we need to teach our drivers. David accepted the position. It felt like the universe was telling him something, that his experience hadn't just been random, but had been leading him towards something meaningful.
But the attention wasn't all positive. 2 weeks after the arrest, David received a threatening message on social media. "You made mistake. We take care of snitches. Watch your back." Agent Santos took the threat seriously. David was given FBI protection and moved temporarily to a safe location while the Bureau investigated. "The message came from a burner account," Santos explained. "We're tracing it, but it's likely connected to the trafficking network. They want to intimidate you into not testifying." "I'm still testifying," David said firmly, though his hands were shaking. "I know," Santos said, "and we'll keep you safe. But David, I need you to understand, this is the reality of standing up to organized crime. They don't forget. They don't forgive. You're a threat to their entire operation." 3 months after her rescue, Elena was ready to tell her full story. David was allowed to meet with her before the trial, at a secure facility where trafficking victims received support. Elena looked different than she had that night in the car. She'd gained weight, her eyes were clearer, and though she was still obviously traumatized, there was a strength to her that hadn't been there before. "You saved my life," she said through a translator. Though her English was improving, "I had given up hope. I thought I would die in this country, far from my family, and no one would ever know what happened to me." She started crying. "That night when I got in your car, I was praying for courage to jump out on the highway, to end it myself. I couldn't go to New York. I knew what waited for me there would be worse than death." David felt tears in his own eyes. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you, and I'm so glad you're safe now." Elena wiped her eyes. "The FBI told me there are other girls. Girls still trapped. Girls who don't have someone like you to notice them. I want to help find them. I want to testify against the men who did this to me, and tell my story so people know this is real. This is happening." Her translator added, "Elena has agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. She's providing names, locations, details about how the network operates. Her testimony has already led to 3 more arrests and the rescue of 2 other women."
David looked at this young woman who had survived horrors he couldn't imagine and was now using that survival to help others. "You're incredibly brave," he told her. Elena shook her head. "Not brave, just alive, and I want other girls to be alive too." The trial of Viktor Kozlov and Dmitry Sokolov lasted 3 weeks. David testified on the second day, describing the pickup, the conversation he'd overheard, his decision to call the FBI. The defense attorneys tried to discredit him, suggesting he'd misunderstood what he'd heard, that he'd overreacted, that he'd put everyone in danger by involving law enforcement instead of just dropping the passengers off safely. "Mr. Chen," one defense attorney said, "isn't it true that you speak no Russian or Ukrainian? That you couldn't actually understand most of the conversation in your vehicle?" "That's correct," David said. "But I understood the body language. I understood the fear in that young woman's face. And I understood the English conversation about passports and threats about someone's sister. That was enough. But you had no proof anyone was being trafficked. You made assumptions based on very little evidence." "I had enough evidence to be concerned," David said firmly. "And I made a choice to report those concerns to professionals who could investigate properly. That's not overreacting. That's being a responsible citizen." The prosecutor on redirect asked David, "If you had to make the same choice again, knowing the risks, would you still call the FBI?" David looked directly at Elena, who was sitting in the front row of the courtroom gallery. "Absolutely, without hesitation, because her life is worth any risk I might have faced." Elena testified later that week. Through a translator, she described being recruited in Moldova with promises of legitimate nanny work, the lies about visas and work permits, the reality of arriving in Miami and having her passport seized, the months of being forced to service clients, threatened with violence if she refused, told her younger sister back home would be killed if she tried to escape. "Those men," she pointed at Kozlov and Sokolov, "they told me I was going to New York. They said if I caused problems they would find my sister and do to her what they did to me. When I got in that car I knew it was my last chance. I couldn't save myself. But somehow that driver," her voice broke, "he saw me. He knew. He cared enough to risk himself for a stranger." The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found both men guilty on all counts: human trafficking, kidnapping, conspiracy, extortion. Combined, they received sentences totaling over 70 years in prison. As the verdicts were read, Elena collapsed in tears. David, sitting in the back of the courtroom, felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. The case didn't end with the convictions. The FBI's investigation, built on Elena's testimony and evidence from Kozlov and Sokolov's operation, led to a much larger bust. Within 6 months, federal and international law enforcement had arrested 34 people connected to the trafficking network across 5 countries. They rescued 47 women who had been trafficked into the United States and identified 23 more who had been trafficked to other countries. David was asked to speak at an FBI conference on human trafficking awareness. Standing before a room full of law enforcement professionals, he felt like an imposter. "I'm not an expert," he began. I'm not law enforcement. I'm not a social worker or a trafficking specialist. I'm just a driver who paid attention one night and made a phone call. He clicked to his first slide, a photo of his Uber dashboard from that night. But here's what I learned. Trafficking doesn't look like the movies. It's not always obvious kidnappers and victims in chains. It's often subtle. It's people who look like they might belong together. It's situations that could have innocent explanations but don't feel quite right. David described the signs he'd noticed. Elena's lack of luggage for an airport trip, her fearful body language, the way the men controlled her movements without touching her, the overheard conversation about passports and threats. Any one of those things alone might not mean anything, David said. But together, they painted a picture, and I made a choice to trust my instincts and report what I was seeing. He paused, looking around the room. I know most drivers will never encounter trafficking, but what if every Uber driver, every Lyft driver, every taxi driver was trained to recognize these signs? What if every hotel worker, every flight attendant, every person who interacts with the public knew what to look for? That question led to a partnership between the FBI, rideshare companies, and anti-trafficking organizations. They developed training modules for drivers, teaching them to recognize potential trafficking situations and how to safely report them. Within a year, the training had been implemented by Uber, Lyft, and major taxi companies nationwide. Over 500,000 drivers completed the program, and it worked. In the first year after implementation, drivers reported 1,247 suspected trafficking situations. Law enforcement confirmed that 418 of those reports were legitimate, leading to 89 arrests and the rescue of 127 victims. Not all the reports were accurate, David told a reporter doing a follow-up story. Some were well-meaning but mistaken. But that's okay. I'd rather have 1,000 false reports than miss one real victim because a driver wasn't sure and didn't want to be wrong. David and Elena stayed in touch after the trial. She was granted a U visa, a special visa for crime victims who cooperate with law enforcement, allowing her to remain in the United States. She enrolled in community college studying social work, determined to help other trafficking victims. David helped her navigate life in America, explaining banking systems, helping her get a phone plan, teaching her to drive. You are like my American father, Elena told him one day over coffee. She'd been in the US for a year now, her English much improved. David smiled. And you're like the daughter I never had. He'd been divorced for 5 years, no children. Elena's family was still in Moldova. She spoke to her younger sister regularly, relieved that the threats against her had ended with the arrests. Elena told David about her plans. I want to go back to Moldova someday. Not to live but to warn girls. To tell them the truth about these job opportunities in America. To help them recognize the lies before they get trapped like I was. That's dangerous, David said. The trafficking networks still operate there. I know, Elena said, but someone must do it. If I stay silent, more girls will be tricked. More families will lose daughters. I can't let that happen just because I'm afraid. David recognized that determination. It was the same feeling that had made him call the FBI instead of looking away. The same refusal to let fear override doing what was right. When you're ready to go, David said, I'll help you. We'll make sure you're protected. We'll coordinate with authorities. We'll do it smart and safe. Elena smiled. Like you did that night in the car. Like I did that night in the car, David agreed. David's new role at Uber's safety division meant he spent his days developing and teaching the trafficking awareness program he'd helped create. He traveled to cities across America, training drivers on what to look for. Trafficking victims often can't ask for help directly, he'd tell rooms full of drivers. Their traffickers are with them. They're being watched. They're threatened. So we have to look for indirect signs. He'd project a list on the screen. Warning signs. Passenger seems fearful, anxious, or submissive. Passengers appear to not know each other well, despite traveling together. Older passengers answering questions for younger passengers. Passenger has no luggage for a long trip. Passenger is dressed inappropriately for weather or occasion. Passenger has visible injuries or appears malnourished. Conversations about payment, debts, or someone being owned. References to not being able to leave. Passenger seems coached on what to say. Passenger's story doesn't match their destination or circumstances. Again, David would emphasize, any one of these alone might be nothing, but multiple signs together, that's when you trust your gut and make the call. He'd then walk through scenarios, helping drivers practice the same technique he'd used, making a call to authorities while making it seem like a normal business conversation, staying calm, buying time without alerting potential traffickers. Your safety comes first, David always stressed. You're not law enforcement. You're not rescuers. You're eyes and ears. You notice, you report, you let professionals handle the rest. Don't try to be a hero. Just be an aware, caring human who makes a phone call. After one training session in Houston, a driver approached him. I think I saw something 6 months ago, the driver said quietly. A young girl, maybe 14, with 2 older men. She looked terrified. I thought about saying something, but I talked myself out of it. Told myself I was probably wrong, that it wasn't my business. The driver's eyes filled with tears. I wonder if I could have helped her, if I'd just made a phone call. David put his hand on the driver's shoulder. You can't change the past, but you can change how you respond in the future. Next time, and I hope there isn't a next time, but if there is, you'll know what to do. I will, the driver said firmly. I promise. I'll never talk myself out of reporting again. As David dove deeper into anti-trafficking work, he learned uncomfortable truths about how victims fell through the cracks. Hotels that didn't train staff to recognize signs. Airlines that didn't question unaccompanied minors traveling with adults who weren't relatives. Border agents overwhelmed by volume who missed red flags. Even law enforcement agencies that sometimes treated victims as criminals, arresting them for prostitution without asking if they were being trafficked. David became an advocate for systemic change. He testified before Congress about the need for better training across industries. He worked with hotel chains to implement awareness programs. He partnered with airlines to develop protocols for flight attendants. But he also learned about the complexity of the problem. Trafficking wasn't just a criminal justice issue. It was rooted in poverty, lack of opportunity, gender inequality, corruption, and demand for commercial sex. We can't just arrest our way out of this, Agent Santos told him during one of their regular check-ins. We need to address why trafficking happens in the first place, why women in poor countries are vulnerable to recruitment, why there's demand for trafficked labor and sex, why victims often don't trust authorities enough to seek help. David struggled with the enormity of it. So what do we do? How do we actually stop this? We can't stop it completely, Santos admitted, but we can disrupt networks, rescue victims, prosecute traffickers, and educate the public so people like you are paying attention. Every victim rescued is a victory. Every network dismantled saves future victims. It's not enough, but it's something. David thought about Elena, one victim, saved by one observant driver on one night. If his story inspired even a handful of other people to pay attention, to make that call, to risk involvement, how many more Elenas might be saved? 2 years after rescuing Elena, David received a call from Agent Santos. We've got a situation, she said, and we need your help. The FBI had been tracking another trafficking network, this one larger, more sophisticated, more dangerous than the Kozlov operation. They'd identified a major hub in Miami, where victims were being held before distribution to other cities. We need someone to go in undercover as a rideshare driver, Santos explained. Someone the network might use for transportation without suspecting anything. Someone who knows what to look for and can remain calm under pressure. David's stomach dropped. You want me to go undercover? Not exactly undercover in the traditional sense, Santos clarified. We want you to work normal shifts in areas where we know this network operates. If they request rides, which they will, they use rideshare services extensively, you'll be wired, and we'll have teams ready to move. You'd be our eyes inside their operation. Isn't that incredibly dangerous? David asked. Yes, Santos said honestly. These people are more ruthless than Kozlov. They've been linked to multiple murders. If they suspected you were working with us, you'd be in serious danger. David thought about Elena, about the 127 victims rescued because of the training program, about all the women still trapped in systems like this. I'll do it, he said. For the next 3 weeks, David drove for Uber in specific neighborhoods the FBI had identified as operational zones for the trafficking network. He was wired with sophisticated recording equipment. FBI surveillance teams tracked his every move. He had a panic button disguised as a phone case charm. Most rides were completely normal, regular people going to regular places, but David was hyper-vigilant, watching for the signs he'd learned to recognize. On the 18th day, he got a ping for a pickup at a rundown apartment complex. 3 passengers, 2 men and a teenage girl who couldn't have been more than 15. David's pulse quickened. The girl had dead eyes and moved mechanically. The men were speaking Spanish, but their body language was all wrong, possessive, controlling, threatening. As they got in the car, David activated the recording system with a subtle gesture. Where to? He asked. Take us to the West Side Inn, one of the men said. You know it? David knew it. The FBI had flagged it as a suspected trafficking hub, a pay-by-the-hour motel where victims were held and customers brought to them. I know it, David confirmed, pulling out into traffic. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his heart was hammering. The men talked quietly in Spanish. David's equipment was recording everything. The girl stared out the window, silent tears rolling down her face. One of the men noticed. He said something sharp in Spanish and the girl quickly wiped her eyes, nodding in fear. David had seen this before. He knew what it meant. He followed the protocol he and the FBI had established. He subtly adjusted his phone mount, the signal that indicated potential trafficking. The surveillance team would have received the alert. Actually, David said, I need to take a slightly different route.
Construction on the main road. My GPS is rerouting us. It wasn't true, but it bought time. Instead of the 10-minute direct route to the motel, David took a 15-minute route through areas where the FBI had surveillance teams positioned. The men didn't notice. They were confident, relaxed, not suspecting that the driver was anything other than what he appeared to be. As David turned onto a quiet street 3 blocks from the motel, he saw what he'd been told to look for, a specific van parked on the corner, with a specific bumper sticker. That was the signal. The FBI was ready. David kept driving, turning the next corner as planned, and suddenly, the street was full of federal agents, vehicles blocking all exits. FBI. Nobody move. The 2 traffickers were arrested without incident. The girl, her name was Sophia, they later learned, was taken into protective custody by specially trained victim advocates. Sophia was from Honduras. She'd been smuggled into the United States by a coyote her mother paid to get her across the border to supposedly join relatives in Houston. The coyote had instead sold her to the trafficking network. She'd been in the U.S. for 8 months, held in various locations, forced to service clients, beaten when she resisted. She was 14 years old, but Sophia wasn't alone at the location the traffickers had been taking her to. When the FBI raided the West Side Inn, they found 6 more girls, ages 13 to 17, being held in 2 rooms. The raid also yielded documents and phones that led to 4 more locations across Miami. By the end of the week, federal and local law enforcement had rescued 23 trafficking victims and arrested 17 people involved in the operation. This is one of the largest trafficking busts in Miami history, Agent Santos told David at a debriefing. And it happened because you were willing to put yourself at risk. Those 23 girls are free because of you. David felt overwhelmed. I just drove the car. I just followed the protocol we'd established. You did more than that, Santos insisted. You stayed calm under pressure. You recognized the signs. You executed the plan perfectly. And most importantly, you were willing to be in that position in the first place. Most people wouldn't have volunteered for this. She paused. David, you've saved lives, plural. Elena 2 years ago, now Sophia and 22 others. You've become someone these networks should fear. A civilian who knows what to look for and has the courage to act on it. I'm not trying to be a hero, David said. I'm just trying to do what's right. That's what makes you an actual hero, Santos replied. But being a hero came with costs David hadn't fully anticipated. The undercover work, even though it had been brief, left him with anxiety he couldn't shake. He found himself seeing potential trafficking everywhere, imagining danger in normal situations, unable to turn off the hypervigilance. He started having nightmares. In them, he'd see Sophia's dead eyes, Elena's terrified face, the faces of all those girls who'd been rescued. But in the nightmares, he was too late. He couldn't save them. He watched helplessly as they disappeared into systems that would destroy them. His therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, explained it as secondary trauma. You've been exposed to horrific situations. You've learned about the worst of human behavior. Your brain is trying to process that, and it's manifesting as anxiety and nightmares. But I didn't experience what they experienced, David protested. I have no right to be traumatized. Trauma isn't a competition, Dr. Walsh said gently. Witnessing suffering, being exposed to danger, carrying the weight of knowing what you know, these things affect you. You're allowed to struggle with that. David took a leave of absence from his role at Uber. He needed time to recover, to process, to figure out how to do this work without destroying himself in the process. Elena visited him during this time. She'd heard about his struggles and wanted to help the man who had saved her. When I first came to the safe house after you rescued me, Elena said, I was so broken. I had nightmares every night. I was afraid of every sound, every person. The counselors told me I had PTSD. I thought I was weak. She took David's hand. But they taught me, trauma is not weakness. It's a normal response to abnormal situations. You saved me, David. But witnessing what was happening to me, hearing about what happened to others, putting yourself in danger, that affects you too. You're not weak for struggling. You're human. Her words helped. So did the therapy. So did taking time to step back and focus on his own healing. After 3 months, David was ready to return to work. But he'd learned important lessons about boundaries, about self-care, about the necessity of processing trauma instead of pushing through it. David's story, both his initial rescue of Elena and his undercover work leading to the larger bust, became the centerpiece of a national awareness campaign. The FBI, in partnership with several anti-trafficking organizations, launched See Something, Save Someone, a public education initiative teaching ordinary people to recognize and report trafficking. David became the face of the campaign. His ordinariness was part of the message. You don't have to be law enforcement or have special training. You just have to pay attention and be willing to make a phone call. The campaign included training videos featuring David explaining the warning signs, a hotline number for reporting suspected trafficking, partnerships with rideshare companies, hotels, airlines, and other industries, educational materials for schools and community organizations, social media campaigns spreading awareness. The response was overwhelming. In the first year, the hotline received over 50,000 calls. Not all were legitimate trafficking cases. Many were domestic disputes, immigration issues, or misunderstandings. But 4,200 calls led to confirmed trafficking investigations, resulting in 387 arrests and the rescue of 891 victims. 891 Elenas and Sophias, who got a chance at freedom because someone paid attention and made a call. But the campaign also faced criticism. Some argued it was creating paranoia, leading to false reports that wasted law enforcement resources and traumatized innocent people. There were cases of people being wrongly accused, immigrant families reported because they looked suspicious, consensual relationships reported because someone didn't approve, teenagers traveling with parents reported because of racial bias. David took these criticisms seriously. In the second year of the campaign, they added extensive training on bias, on the difference between suspicion and certainty, on cultural sensitivity. "We don't want people reporting every immigrant family they see," David said in revised training materials. "We want people to recognize specific, concrete signs of trafficking, control, fear, injury, inconsistent stories, references to debt or ownership. Not just this family looks different from me." The refinement helped. False report rates dropped from 15% to 8%, while legitimate reports actually increased, indicating people were getting better at recognizing real trafficking, rather than just reporting anything that made them uncomfortable. David's story reached beyond America. He was invited to speak at international conferences on human trafficking in Brussels, in Tokyo, in Sydney. Each country had different trafficking patterns, different laws, different cultural contexts. But the underlying principles remained the same. Traffickers exploited vulnerability. Victims couldn't ask for help directly, and ordinary people could make a difference by paying attention. In Moldova, Elena's home country, David and Elena worked together on a prevention program. They visited schools and community centers, warning young women about the lies traffickers use to recruit victims. "They will promise you good jobs," Elena told a room full of teenage girls in her hometown. "Nanny positions, restaurant work, modeling contracts. They will show you fake documents, fake contracts, fake opportunities. And when you arrive in America or Western Europe, they will take your passport and force you into prostitution or labor." She pointed to David. "This man saved my life because he paid attention. But I would never have needed saving if I had known the truth before I left Moldova, if someone had warned me, if I had recognized the lies." The prevention program in Moldova and surrounding countries was remarkably effective. In the first year, over 10,000 young women participated in the training. When traffickers approached them with fake job offers, many recognized the warning signs and reported the recruiters to authorities. 43 trafficking recruiters were arrested in Moldova, Romania, and Ukraine based on these reports. An unknown number of women were saved from becoming victims because they'd been educated about the tactics traffickers used. "This is the real solution," David told a conference in Geneva. "Yes, we need to rescue victims. Yes, we need to prosecute traffickers. But we also need to prevent trafficking in the first place by educating potential victims and reducing their vulnerability." He outlined a comprehensive approach. Economic development in source countries, so women had legitimate opportunities. Education programs warning about trafficking tactics. Legal protections for migrant workers. Demand reduction, prosecuting buyers of trafficked labor and sex. Support systems for victims so they could rebuild their lives. "No single intervention solves trafficking," David said, "but combined, these approaches save lives and disrupt networks. Every rescued victim, every prevented recruitment, every dismantled network, they all matter." 5 years after rescuing Elena, David was invited to speak at a high school in Miami. The school's social studies teacher had made David's story part of the curriculum on human rights and social justice. Standing before 200 teenagers, David felt nervous in a way he never did speaking to law enforcement or industry professionals. Teenagers were a tough crowd, cynical, easily bored, quick to dismiss adults talking about serious topics. 5 years ago, David began, I was driving for Uber, just trying to make ends meet after losing my accounting job. I picked up 3 passengers who seemed a little off, and I made a choice that changed my life and saved someone else's. He told the story, the fearful girl, the controlling men, the overheard conversation, the decision to call the FBI. As he spoke, he watched the students' faces shift from polite attention to genuine engagement. When he finished, hands shot up. "Weren't you scared?" a girl asked. "Terrified," David admitted. "I thought about just dropping them off and pretending I hadn't noticed anything. It would have been easier and safer, but I couldn't live with myself if something happened to that girl and I'd done nothing to help." "What if you'd been wrong?" a boy challenged. "What if it was just a normal family trip and you got them in trouble for nothing?" "That was a risk," David acknowledged. "But here's my thinking. If I'm wrong, the worst that happens is some people are inconvenienced and maybe annoyed with me. If I'm right and do nothing, a young woman gets trafficked and possibly killed. Those aren't equal risks. Being wrong was a price I was willing to pay." Another hand. "Do you think we could recognize trafficking if we saw it?" "Absolutely," David said. "You're young, you use technology, You're observant. You might actually be better at noticing when something's off with someone your age than adults are. The question is whether you'd act on what you noticed. He pulled up slides showing the warning signs again, but framed for teenagers. RNANs, orkinoids, arguets, Eol, always has to check with someone, bruises or injuries, with inconsistent explanations. On older boyfriend, soft girlfriend, who seems controlling. Talk about owing someone money, or being owned. Social media profiles that look forced or fake. Trafficking doesn't always look like strangers kidnapping people, David explained. Sometimes it's a boyfriend who gradually becomes controlling and exploitative. Sometimes it's a family member selling a kid. Sometimes it's a friend who gets recruited and then is forced to recruit others. The room was completely silent, every student paying attention now. So here's what I'm asking you to do, David said. Pay attention to your friends. If something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Talk to a trusted adult, a teacher, a counselor, a parent. You're not snitching. You're not overreacting. You're potentially saving someone's life. After the assembly, a student approached David privately. She was maybe 16, nervous, wringing her hands. Mr. Chen, I think my friend might be in trouble. Her boyfriend is 25, and she's only 15. He doesn't let her go anywhere without him. He bought her a phone, but he tracks everything she does on it. She says she owes him for things he's bought her. Is that what you were talking about? David's heart sank. Yes, that sounds like grooming and potential trafficking. Do you trust your school counselor? The girl nodded. Let's go talk to them together right now, David said. What's your friend's name? Maya, the girl whispered. Her name is Maya. Within 3 hours, school authorities and police had intervened. Maya was removed from the relationship, and her boyfriend was arrested on charges of statutory rape and human trafficking of a minor. Maya's friend, whose name was Jessica, had potentially saved her from years of exploitation, possibly even death. You did exactly the right thing, David told Jessica afterward. You noticed. You trusted your instincts. You told someone. That's all it takes. Jessica was crying. I almost didn't say anything. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was none of my business. But after hearing your story, I couldn't not say something. That's how it spreads, David said gently. One person makes a choice to act. That choice saves someone. The story of that choice inspires someone else to act. And the ripple keeps going.
7 years after that night in the Uber, David organized a reunion of people whose lives had intersected through trafficking intervention. Elena was there, now working full-time as a social worker, specializing in trafficking victims. Sophia, now 21 and studying criminal justice, determined to become a prosecutor focusing on trafficking cases. Maya, the girl Jessica had helped save from her exploitative boyfriend, now a college student and anti-trafficking advocate. Also present were several other survivors. Women and girls who had been rescued through the various operations and initiatives David had been involved with. Agent Maria Santos, who had become both a professional partner and friend, Dr. Walsh, David's therapist, and dozens of rideshare drivers, teachers, hotel workers, and ordinary people who had reported suspected trafficking and saved lives. When I started driving for Uber 7 years ago, David told the gathered group, I was just trying to pay bills. I had no idea that one ride would change my entire life's trajectory, that one choice to pay attention would lead to all of this. He gestured around the room. Every person here represents a choice. Elena represents my choice to call the FBI that night. Sophia represents my choice to go undercover. Maya represents Jessica's choice to speak up. And all the other survivors here represent choices made by drivers, teachers, hotel clerks, flight attendants, ordinary people who noticed and acted. Elena stood up. I want to say something. For 7 years, I have watched David tell this story. Always he says it was just one choice, just one phone call. He makes it sound small. She looked at David with fierce affection, but it wasn't small. It was everything. It was my life. It was my future. It was my freedom. And not just mine. Every person in this room who is alive and free. We are here because someone made that small choice. She turned to address the others. David taught me that paying attention is not small. Caring about strangers is not small. Making a phone call when you're not sure is not small. These things save lives. They are everything. Sophia nodded. I was 14 years old when David picked me up in that Uber. I had given up hope. I thought I would die in that system. But he noticed me. He saw past the situation to the truth underneath. He didn't think not my problem. He thought this girl needs help. She looked around the room at the other survivors. How many of us are here because someone thought that? Because someone decided our lives were worth the risk, the effort, the discomfort of getting involved? Every hand in the room went up. Maya spoke next. I'm here because my friend Jessica heard David speak at our school. She learned the warning signs. She recognized that my relationship wasn't normal. She spoke up even though she was scared I'd be mad at her. scared she might be wrong. David's choice to save Elena inspired Jessica's choice to save me. That's how change happens. David listened to these young women, these survivors who had become advocates, and felt overwhelmed with emotion. This was the real impact of that night, 7 years ago. Not just the immediate rescue, but the ripple effect of awareness, of people learning to pay attention, of courage becoming contagious. On the 8th anniversary of rescuing Elena, David launched the Pay Attention Save Someone Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to trafficking awareness, prevention, and survivor support. The foundation's mission was threefold: unforgettable, education, training ordinary people to recognize and report trafficking; prevention, working in source countries to warn potential victims and reduce vulnerability; support, providing resources for trafficking survivors to rebuild their lives. Elena joined as Director of Survivor Services. Sophia became Youth Outreach Coordinator. Agent Santos served on the advisory board. Dr. Walsh provided clinical oversight for trauma-informed programming. The foundation developed comprehensive training programs for multiple industries: rideshare and taxi drivers, hotel and hospitality workers, airlines and travel industry, healthcare providers, educators and school personnel, faith communities, general public awareness. Within 2 years, the foundation had trained over 250,000 people across the United States and internationally. Reports of suspected trafficking through the foundation's hotline led to 89 confirmed rescues in that time period. But David knew the numbers didn't tell the whole story. For every rescue, there were countless prevented trafficking situations. Young women who didn't board planes with fake recruiters because they'd been educated about warning signs. Potential victims who recognized grooming behavior and got help. Vulnerable people who found support before being exploited. We'll never know how many people we've saved through prevention, David told a documentary crew filming the foundation's work. We only know about the ones who were already trapped and needed rescue. But I believe the prevention work is just as important. Every person who doesn't become a victim in the first place. That's a success story we'll never hear, but it matters just as much. The foundation also pioneered new approaches to survivor support. Traditional models often focused on immediate crisis intervention, rescue, medical care, temporary housing, but didn't provide long-term support for rebuilding lives. Elena, drawing on her own experience, developed a comprehensive program: long-term housing assistance, education and job training, mental health services, legal advocacy, community building among survivors, economic empowerment through small business loans and financial literacy. Trafficking steals everything from you, Elena explained at a foundation fundraiser. Your freedom, your dignity, your sense of self. Recovery can't just be about being physically safe. It has to be about rebuilding a complete life. Economic stability, education, relationships, purpose, hope for the future. The program was remarkably successful. Survivors who participated had significantly lower rates of re-trafficking, higher rates of economic independence, and better long-term mental health outcomes than those who only received traditional crisis services. 10 years after rescuing Elena, David faced his biggest professional crisis. A prominent journalist wrote an exposé, questioning whether David's story was as heroic as it seemed. The article argued that David had endangered Elena by calling the FBI, that if the traffickers had realized what was happening, they might have killed her. It questioned whether the undercover work had been necessary, or if it had been reckless self-aggrandizement. It highlighted the cases of false reports that had traumatized innocent people. David Chen has built a career and a non-profit on one phone call, the article concluded. But has his crusade against trafficking done more harm than good? Has it created paranoia, racial profiling, and a vigilante mindset among untrained civilians? These are questions worth asking. The criticism stung, partly because some of it was valid. There had been false reports. There had been cases where cultural misunderstandings led to immigrant families being investigated. The emphasis on civilian awareness had sometimes created problems alongside the solutions it provided. David read the article multiple times, his stomach churning. Part of him wanted to defend himself, to point out all the lives saved, all the victims rescued, but another part recognized that the journalist had raised legitimate concerns. He called an emergency meeting of the foundation's board. We need to address these criticisms honestly, David said. Not dismiss them, not get defensive, but actually examine whether we're causing harm we haven't acknowledged. Over the next 3 months, the foundation conducted an independent review of its programs. They hired external evaluators to assess both the benefits and harms of their work. The findings were mixed. Positive impacts. The estimated 1,000 plus victims rescued through foundation-related reports. 50,000 plus people educated about trafficking prevention, significant increase in public awareness of trafficking, multiple trafficking networks disrupted, improved coordination between civilians and law enforcement, negative impacts, 127 confirmed false reports that led to investigations of innocent people, evidence of racial and ethnic bias in some reporting patterns, cases of family separation based on misunderstandings, psychological impact on people wrongly suspected. David published the full report on the Foundation's website, along with a public statement. I saved Elena's life 10 years ago, and I don't regret that choice, but I also have to acknowledge that the movement that grew from that night has sometimes caused harm. People have been wrongly accused, families have been traumatized, bias has influenced who gets reported and investigated. These harms don't negate the good we've done, but they're real, and they matter. We're implementing changes to address them. Better training on bias, clearer guidelines on what constitutes reasonable suspicion, support for people wrongly accused, and accountability when our programs cause harm. I believe civilian awareness can save lives, but I also believe we have a responsibility to do it thoughtfully, carefully, and with constant evaluation of our impact, both positive and negative. The transparency was risky. Some donors pulled their support, arguing the Foundation had admitted too much fault, but others increased their support, appreciating the honesty and commitment to improvement. And critically, trafficking survivors stood by David and the Foundation. Perfect doesn't exist, Elena said in a video response. David's choice to save me wasn't perfect, it was risky and could have gone wrong, but doing nothing would have been worse. The Foundation's work isn't perfect, mistakes have been made, but doing nothing while thousands are trafficked would be worse. She looked directly at the camera. We don't need perfect heroes. We need imperfect humans who try to do good, acknowledge when they cause harm, and keep improving. That's what David has always been. That's what this Foundation is, and I'm proud to be part of it. 12 years after that night in the Uber, David Chen stood in a hotel ballroom in Miami, preparing to receive an award from the Department of Justice for his anti-trafficking work. Looking around the room, he saw the constellation of people whose lives had intersected through this work. Elena, now 31 and the director of a trafficking recovery program. Sophia, a prosecutor in the Human Trafficking Division. Jessica, a social worker specializing in at-risk youth. Maya, a victim advocate. Agent Santos, now promoted to head the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. But there were also people David didn't know, survivors he'd never met, rescued through operations his work had inspired, activists who'd been motivated by his story to start their own initiatives, law enforcement officers trained in protocols his foundation had developed. As he accepted the award, David thought about that night 12 years ago, how he'd almost canceled the ride when he saw the sketchy motel, how he'd almost talked himself out of calling the FBI, how close he'd come to looking away. I'm accepting this award, David said, but it doesn't belong just to me. It belongs to Elena, who survived and then chose to help others survive. It belongs to Agent Santos and law enforcement officers who do dangerous work to rescue victims. It belongs to every rideshare driver, hotel worker, teacher, and ordinary person who has paid attention and reported concerns. He paused, looking around the room. 12 years ago, I was just a guy trying to make rent by driving for Uber. I had no special training, no particular expertise. I just noticed something wrong and made a phone call. That's all it took. David's voice grew more passionate. That's the message I want everyone to understand. You don't need to be special to make a difference. You don't need authority or expertise or resources. You just need to pay attention, to trust your instincts, to care enough about strangers to risk being wrong. He held up the award. This represents 12 years of work, thousands of people trained, hundreds of victims rescued, networks dismantled, lives rebuilt, but it all started with one choice in one moment. My choice to call the FBI instead of looking away. David looked directly at the camera documenting the event. Somewhere right now, someone is in the position I was in 12 years ago. They're seeing something that doesn't seem right. They're debating whether to get involved. They're weighing the risks of acting against the comfort of doing nothing. He leaned forward. If that's you, if you're that person right now, I'm asking you to choose courage. Choose involvement. Choose to make that call, even if you're not sure. Because somewhere, there's another Elena, another Sophia, another person whose life depends on whether you pay attention. Be the person who notices. Be the person who cares. Be the person who acts. That's all it takes to save a life. The next morning, David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Chen, my name is Robert. I'm a Lyft driver in Chicago. Last night I picked up passengers that reminded me of your story. I noticed warning signs, fear, control, inconsistent story. I almost talked myself out of reporting because I thought I might be wrong. But I remembered what you said about preferring to be wrong than to ignore someone in danger. I called the police. Turns out I was right. A 17-year-old girl is safe today because I paid attention.
Thank you for teaching me to trust my instincts. David read the message 3 times, tears in his eyes. This was it. This was the real impact. Not the awards or recognition. Not even the hundreds of rescues directly connected to his work. It was this. One driver in Chicago who heard a story and made a choice. One girl who would grow up free because someone paid attention. One more ripple spreading out from that night 12 years ago. David forwarded the message to Elena with a note. It continues. She responded immediately. It will always continue. That's what you started. Not just rescuing people, but teaching others to rescue. Not just saving lives, but creating a culture where people don't look away. Your legacy isn't what you did. It's what you inspired others to do. David thought about that as he packed for his flight back to Miami. 12 years ago, he'd been an unemployed accountant driving for Uber to survive. Today, he ran a foundation, trained thousands of people, and had helped save hundreds of lives. But it had started with the simplest choice: to pay attention when it was easier not to call for help when staying silent was safer, to care about a stranger when indifference was more convenient. That choice was available to everyone, every day, in every interaction. You didn't need to be special. You didn't need training or authority. You just needed to notice, to care, to act. David opened his laptop and started writing, not another training manual or awareness campaign, but something more personal, a letter to anyone who might find themselves in the position he'd been in 12 years ago. Dear future rescuer, you don't know it yet, but you're going to encounter someone who needs help. It might be obvious, clear signs of trafficking or abuse, or it might be subtle, just a feeling that something's not quite right. In that moment, you'll have a choice. You can look away. You can tell yourself it's not your business. You can convince yourself you're probably wrong. Or you can pay attention, trust your instincts, and make a call. I won't lie to you. Choosing to act might be uncomfortable. You might be wrong. You might face criticism or pushback. You might put yourself at some risk. But choosing not to act might mean someone suffers, someone dies, someone disappears into a system that will destroy them. Those aren't equal consequences. 12 years ago, I picked up 3 passengers in my Uber. One of them needed help desperately, but couldn't ask for it. I noticed, I acted, and that choice changed everything, not just for her but for hundreds of others, whose lives were touched by what followed. You have that same power, right now, today, tomorrow, every day. You can be the person who notices, who cares, who acts. All it takes is paying attention and being willing to make a phone call. So here's what I'm asking you. Don't look away. Trust your instincts. Risk being wrong. Choose courage over convenience. Because somewhere, right now, another Elena is waiting. Another life is hanging in the balance. And the person who can save them might be you. Pay attention. Make the call. Save someone. That's how we change the world. One noticed person at a time. With hope and urgency. David Chen. He posted the letter on the Foundation's website, on social media, anywhere people might see it, and then he closed his laptop and looked out the airplane window at the city below. Thousands of people, thousands of stories, thousands of opportunities to notice and act. Somewhere down there, another driver was picking up passengers, another hotel clerk was checking in guests, another teacher was observing students, another person was at the crossroads between seeing and looking away. David hoped they would choose to see. He hoped they would trust their instincts. He hoped they would make the call, because that's all it took. One choice, one moment, one person who gave a damn. That was the legacy of that night 12 years ago, and it would continue, rippling outward, for as long as people chose to pay attention and act on what they saw. This story is dedicated to every rideshare driver, hotel worker, flight attendant, teacher, and ordinary person who has ever noticed something wrong and had the courage to report it. Your vigilance saves lives. Your willingness to get involved protects the vulnerable. Your refusal to look away makes all the difference. Thank you for paying attention.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.